Hello everyone. I'm really glad you're here. Tonight, I want to help you let go of the day and ease into rest. I know many of you use these videos to fall asleep, and it means a lot to be part of your nightly routine. So if you haven't already, take a moment to like the video and subscribe. It truly helps. Now, settle in, close your eyes, and let's begin. Story 1. The ride that shouldn't have happened. I live in a city where the public transportation system is severely understaffed, so much so that on most days, you're forced to call and double check whether your bus will even show up. On weekdays, if the system can't get a bus to your stop, they'll send a lift to ensure you get to work on time. It's an unusual setup. But when everything is falling apart, sometimes the oddest fixes become the norm. That Tuesday morning, after checking multiple times and confirming that my bus wasn't coming, I was offered a ride through the system. The driver who arrived was an older gentleman, soft-spoken, smiling, and with a casual energy that didn't raise any red flags. Not at first anyway. We made small talk, and soon he was asking me personal questions. I'm a bartender, and I'm used to being friendly. It didn't immediately strike me as odd. I mentioned that I wasn't married, and spent most of my time either working or at home with family. It seemed harmless enough, just another chat during a shared ride. As the conversation went on, he leaned over slightly and said, with a half laugh, "I'd marry you in a heartbeat." I assumed he was being funny, or maybe just overly polite in that old-fashioned way some older men are. I brushed it off, smiled politely, and kept the conversation light. I asked him to drop me off downtown so I could grab some groceries before work. When we pulled up, he paused and said he had been joking earlier, that he was already married and had a son about my age. Then he asked me if I might be interested in meeting his son. Looking back, maybe that was the moment the tone shifted from unusual to truly uncomfortable, but I didn't catch it. With a history of bad relationships and not much success dating inside my usual circles, I figured maybe it wouldn't hurt to meet someone different, so I gave him my number, thanked him for the ride, and we went our separate ways. The next morning, I received a text from him. He asked if I needed a ride to work again. I politely declined, saying the bus was running that day and I'd be fine. But he insisted, saying it would be his pleasure, and that he'd pick me up around 3 p.m. Then, an hour later, he texted again, this time asking if I wanted to have lunch with him before work. That caught me off guard. I told him I had other obligations and wouldn't be available. He simply responded, "Okay, see you at 3. I began to feel a bit anxious, but I didn't want to jump to conclusions. When 3 p.m. came, he messaged to say he was waiting outside. I stopped him quickly and said I was ready to go, motioning for us to head downtown. I got into the back seat, but as soon as I closed the door, he turned to face me and said he had something to confess. He told me that ever since I removed my mask during our first ride, his heart had been dancing like a butterfly. He said he couldn't stop thinking about me since that moment, and that he'd like to spend more time with me. He even offered to pay me just to hang out with him. At that moment, every internal alarm I had started ringing. I tried to keep my expression calm, knowing that sometimes it's safer to play along than to confront someone who might be unstable. The ride was long and awkward. He spoke in poetic, obsessive tones, calling me his Lebanese queen, and saying that he felt a kind of love at first sight. I kept nodding and giving short responses, hoping the drive would end soon. When we finally reached downtown, I stepped out quickly and walked into the hotel where I worked, trying to shake off the strange feeling that had settled in my chest. That evening, after an intense happy hour shift, I checked my phone and saw that he had texted me several times. One of the messages included a photo of the hotel where I worked. Another said he was waiting outside, ready to drive me home. I replied that I already had a ride and didn't need a lift. The tone of his messages shifted, still polite but increasingly persistent. The next day, while I was out running errands with my mom and sister, he messaged again. This time, he asked how early he could come to pick me up. He told me he couldn't stop thinking about me. I responded as firmly as I could, asking him to stop texting. I told him I was with my family, but it didn't deter him. The texts continued throughout the day and into the evening. He said his heart was aching to see me. He called me his queen over and over, as if I was already in a relationship with him, something I never consented to. By Friday morning, everything escalated. He texted me, declaring that he loved me no matter what. He claimed he had told his wife about me, and confessed that he wanted a divorce because he was in love with me. I was horrified. I told him what he was doing wasn't right, that he shouldn't treat his wife that way, and that I had no part in any of this. But instead of backing off, he became more forceful. He said, "I'm picking you up at 5:30, and I'm not taking no for an answer." I didn't reply. I spent the day trying to ignore him, but the dread built up steadily as evening approached. At 5:25, my video doorbell rang, and there he was, standing on my porch. I didn't answer. I wasn't home, but he stood there for 15 minutes, as if waiting for me to open the door and welcome him in. He texted again, saying he could come pick me up from my parents' house instead. That's when I called the non-emergency police line. Unfortunately, by the time I got through, he had already left. I gave them a general report, but there wasn't much they could do unless he showed up again and made a direct threat. The dispatcher advised me to report him through the lift platform, which I did. I haven't heard anything back since then. But that feeling, that chilling discomfort of being watched, pursued, and idealized by someone you barely know, hasn't gone away. The calm politeness that masked obsession, the way it escalated from casual friendliness to outright intrusion, it all made me realize how quickly things can spiral when a stranger believes they're entitled to your presence. In retrospect, there were many signs. The way he disliked being told to wait, the way he didn't take no for an answer, the sudden, intense declarations. But even with those warning signs, the reality of it all was still shocking. I've always tried to give people the benefit of the doubt. Maybe that's part of the problem. Maybe we're taught too often to be polite, to not make a scene, to be understanding, even when our instincts scream otherwise. I was lucky. He didn't break in. He didn't escalate beyond text and presence. But the fear, the emotional damage, the discomfort, that lingered. I check the porch every time I come home now. I avoid giving out my number to strangers, no matter how nice they seem. I learned that safety sometimes means disappointing someone or seeming rude. It's better to be impolite and safe than kind and sorry. Story 2. The unassuming girl and the dangerous stranger. I've never been someone who turns heads. I'm not what anyone would call conventionally attractive, and I've always accepted that. Among my friends, I'm the quiet one, the one who blends into the background, the designated lookout during nights out. People never flirt with me. I've never been catcalled. No one's tried to spike my drink or lure me away at a party. I used to take some small comfort in that invisibility. I thought being plain meant I was safe. But safety, I've learned, has little to do with how the world sees you. Sometimes the most vulnerable people are the ones no one notices, the ones predators think they can manipulate because they believe no one's watching. For a long time, I thought I was immune to danger simply because I didn't draw attention. That illusion shattered the night. A stranger decided I would be the perfect mark. Most evenings after work, I stopped by a local bar, not for the drinks but just to relax. I always order a regular Coke, nothing fancy. I sit in my usual spot, and work on the work on the work-on-lens I've started making out of crystals and copper wire. It's a calming ritual after a long shift. I like the quiet, the routine, the sense of familiarity. I'd been going to that bar for months, and never once had someone tried to sit with me, much less start a conversation. The bartenders knew me by name and let me be. That night started like any other. I had just started wrapping a new stone, when a man I'd never seen before pulled out the chair across from me, and sat down without asking. It startled me, not because he looked threatening, but because it was so unexpected. He smiled, casual and calm, and struck up a conversation as if we were old friends. He asked about the pendant I was making, then about where I was from, what I did for a living, and if I came there often. It all seemed innocent. I'm used to being invisible, so part of me was flattered. When you're overlooked for so long, any attention can feel like a warm light after a long winter. But something about him didn't sit right. It wasn't just the fact that I didn't know him. It was how effortlessly he inserted himself into my space, how he leaned in a little too close, how his eyes didn't quite match the friendliness in his voice. Still, I gave him the benefit of the doubt. I answered his questions politely, laughed a little, and continued working on my pendant. After all, maybe he was just lonely. Maybe he saw someone sitting alone and thought she might want company. We all do that sometimes. Rationalize what doesn't feel right because we're afraid of being impolite. Eventually, I excused myself to go to the bathroom. I brought my purse and phone with me, not because I was scared, just because I always do. A habit ingrained in me from years of being told to be cautious, even when it feels unnecessary. When I came back, my drink was still on the table, untouched, it seemed. I sat back down and waved the waitress over, asking for a fresh drink. As she moved to pick up the old one, the man suddenly became agitated. He told me I was being wasteful, that there was no need to order a new drink. His tone shifted, no longer friendly but scolding. He said I was making extra work for the staff. I stared at him, confused. Why did he care so much? I told him it was none of his business. My money, my drink, my choice. If the waitress didn't mind, why should he? But he wouldn't let it go. He kept pushing, insisting I finish the old drink. That's when my alarm bells really started ringing. To defuse the situation, I pushed the drink toward him and said, "Fine. If it's such a waste, he drink it." That stopped him. He froze for a moment, startled, and then stood up angrily, muttering something under his breath before walking away. I turned to the waitress and quietly told her that something about him didn't feel right. I asked if she could keep an eye on him and told her to throw away my drink. I requested water for the rest of the evening. A few minutes later, my ride showed up, and I left. I didn't think much more of it until the next night when I came back to the bar and learned what had happened after I'd left. Apparently, the bartender caught that same man trying to slip something into a woman's drink. The confrontation turned into a fight. The police were called, and he was arrested. The staff told me he was already under suspicion for similar incidents. The realization hit me hard. He wasn't there just to chat. He had picked me because he thought I was easy, an invisible girl who wouldn't raise her voice or fight back. He thought I was alone, unguarded, and desperate to tension. Maybe he saw me and assumed I'd be too flattered by the interest to notice anything else. Maybe he thought I'd be the perfect victim. I wondered what might have happened if I hadn't followed that old rule about not drinking anything left unattended. What if I hadn't asked for a new drink? What if I'd brushed off his odd behavior as just awkwardness? It was a sobering thought, one that stayed with me long after the shock wore off. I didn't feel flattered anymore. I felt lucky. Lucky that instinct kicked in. Lucky that I was taught to be cautious. Lucky that I wasn't too polite to speak up when something felt wrong. That night changed how I see myself. I used to believe I was safe because I wasn't desirable. I thought predators only went after the obvious targets. The pretty girls, the confident ones. The ones who smiled too much. But danger doesn't discriminate based on appearance. It looks for opportunity. It searches for weakness, for moments when you're not paying attention. And sometimes, it finds you not because of how you look, but because it believes you won't fight back. I realized that I can't take safety for granted just because I blend into the background. The truth is, no one is invisible to someone who is looking for control. I never saw that man again. I don't even know his name. The bar staff said he was banned for life, and that the case was going to court. They were kind, supportive, and apologetic, even though they had no reason to be. I appreciated that. It reminded me that while there are bad people out there, there are also good ones watching out for each other. I kept going to that bar, but I changed my habits. I stayed more aware, kept my guard up, and trusted my instincts more. Being careful didn't mean being fearful. It meant being smart. That night didn't ruin the bar for me, but it did teach me that vigilance matters, even in the places where you feel most comfortable. Sometimes I wonder what might have happened if I had been a little more trusting or a little less cautious. It's a dangerous thought, one that creeps in during quiet moments. But I always stop it in its tracks. I remind myself that there's no shame in being careful. There's no shame in protecting yourself from someone who doesn't have your best interests at heart. I was lucky. Others weren't. That man had done this before. Maybe next time he'll get caught before someone gets hurt. And maybe, just maybe, someone like me, someone quiet, overlooked, and unassuming, will be the reason someone else gets to walk away safe. Story 3. The night the island turned dark. When I was younger, I lived on a small island, a place that felt more like a community than a location. It was one of those places where everyone knew each other, where you could leave your car doors unlocked without worry, and where the concept of danger seemed like something that happened far away to people in bigger cities. The only ways off the island were by ferry, speedboat, or plane, so it was hard to imagine crime ever going unnoticed, or someone simply vanishing without a trace. The air always smelled of salt and old wood. The streets were quiet, and the pace of life was slow. As teenagers, my friends and I used to bar hop almost every night, enjoying cheap drinks and the thrill of the music playing in the background. We were carefree, reckless even, and it didn't occur to us how vulnerable we actually were in a place that offered the illusion of safety. One night, like so many before it, I was out with my friends drinking at one of our favorite pubs. It was called Pop-In, a rowdy spot with loud music, dim lights, and regulars who knew every song played by the live bands that performed there. That night, the crowd was especially big, and the atmosphere buzzed with energy. I remember laughing, dancing, and singing along to the music, the warmth of alcohol making everything feel soft and surreal. My friend Steve was there too. Steve and I had been close for years, and I trusted him more than anyone. He was younger than me by a few years, still in high school, while I was in my early 20s, but we were like brothers. So when he suddenly tugged at my sleeve and asked me to come outside, I followed without question. We stepped into the cool night air, the sound of the band fading behind us. Steve told me he needed to confront someone, some guy who had been dating his little sister. She was still in high school, and Steve was furious that someone older had taken an interest in her. He wanted to make sure this guy knew to back off. I agreed to support him, figuring we'd have a quick chat and be done with it. When the guy showed up, Steve delivered his warning with firmness, but without aggression. I chimed in, backing him up. That was my mistake. I didn't know the guy, and I certainly didn't need to insert myself into the situation, but I did. And he didn't take kindly to it. His eyes narrowed, and he told me I was going to regret opening my mouth. Then he turned and walked away. Steve and I went back inside, trying to shake off the encounter. I started texting a few other friends, sensing that things might escalate. Something about the guy's tone didn't sit right with me. I didn't want to get caught off guard. About 15 minutes later, one of Steve's friends came running in and told us to come outside. We stepped out to find ourselves surrounded. The guy we had confronted had returned, and he'd brought a small army, 15 to 20 men. They circled us, closing in slowly, like a trap snapping shut. I felt the air leave my lungs. My heart thudded against my ribs, and I knew this was no longer just a petty argument. One of the men, the guy's uncle, pulled me aside and slapped me across the face. I stood there stunned as he said, calmly and with complete certainty, that I was a dead man. I tried to stand my ground, but the uncle pulled something from his waistband. A knife. Not just any knife, but a jagged army blade, the kind with a serrated edge designed not just to cut, but to tear. I froze. He gripped my shirt with one hand and held the knife in the other, waving it slightly, letting the light catch on the edge. My thoughts scattered. I couldn't run. I couldn't scream. All I could think was that I was going to be gutted right there, in the place I had once thought of as safe. Around me, the others were arming themselves. One man broke a beer bottle and held it like a weapon. Another rolled up his sleeves and cracked his knuckles. It was like a scene out of a nightmare, and I had no idea how we were going to get out of it without someone getting hurt, or worse. Then, as if summoned by fate, my brother-in-law appeared. He was a tall, intimidating man with a booming voice, and he came barreling in, screaming that he was a cop and that backup was on the way. I had never been so relieved to see anyone in my life. He wasn't bluffing either. He really was in law enforcement, and the sheer confidence in his voice was enough to make the group hesitate. They started backing off, muttering to each other, glancing nervously at one another. The energy shifted. The moment of violence passed like a storm cloud moving quickly over the horizon. The man who had threatened me, Steve's sister's boyfriend, stepped forward again and challenged me to a one-on-one fight. At first I refused, but he kept pressing, and eventually I agreed. Maybe part of me wanted to settle things on my own terms. But then, something strange happened. As we squared off, he suddenly changed his mind. Instead of fighting, he extended his hand. I shook it, still on edge, unsure of what this meant. He told me not to pursue any trouble with his uncle, that he wanted to leave this behind. I nodded, eager to have the night over with. We parted ways and Steve and I returned home. The tension in my chest only began to ease once I locked the door behind me. That night had sobered me up in more ways than one. The alcohol had worn off hours ago, but the adrenaline still surged through me like electricity. I kept replaying the moment the knife appeared, the cold certainty in the uncle's eyes, and the sheer number of people who were ready to hurt us. After that night, I couldn't look at my hometown the same way. I still saw that guy and his uncle occasionally, passing by on the street or standing outside a shop. We never spoke again, just nods, like we were all pretending nothing had happened. But there was always tension in the air, an unspoken truce built on fear and mutual memory. I stopped going out drinking after that. Something about that experience changed me. I realized how easily fun can become fatal, how quickly safety can dissolve into chaos. I started staying home more often, choosing quiet nights over noisy bars. I picked up herbal tea instead of rum, old books instead of loud music. It wasn't that I was afraid. It was that I had learned how fast things can spiral when you least expect it. That night taught me that even the safest places hold shadows. Danger doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it walks right beside you in a pub, laughing and drinking, before revealing its true face. I used to believe that knowing everyone meant you were protected. Now I know better. Familiar faces can hide unfamiliar intentions. I was lucky to walk away that night with nothing but a bruised ego and a shaken spirit. Others aren't always so fortunate. And so, I carry that memory like a scar beneath the skin, not visible, but always there. A reminder to be cautious, to listen to my instincts, and to never again mistake comfort for safety. Story 4. The Quiet Stalker with a Smile. During my sophomore year of high school, I had joined the cast and costume crew for our school's fall play. I was shy, nerdy, and closeted. Someone who spent more time with books and scripts than with people. But there was one person in the crew who instantly stood out to me. His name was Mark. He was charming in that artistic way, always in skinny jeans, always smiling at the right moment. When I found out through a mutual friend that he was bisexual, something shifted inside me. It felt like possibility had entered the room. I started flirting with him, shy at first, just sending memes, lingering a little longer near him backstage, letting my laughter hang in the air after his jokes. We spent more time together, and by the last night of the play, I decided to just go for it. I asked him out. To my shock and excitement, he said yes. The problem, though, wasn't just that Mark said yes. It was that I knew deep down that dating him would mean hiding it from my mom. She was a deeply conservative Christian woman, tolerant from a distance but absolutely unwilling to allow me to have a boyfriend under her roof. So we hid. At first it was thrilling, meeting in secret, going to movies, spending long afternoons in his bedroom or mine, weaving our own little world in the quiet corners of our lives. But the longer we were together, the more demanding Mark became. After we became intimate, something changed. He wasn't just excited to see me anymore. He was obsessed with it. He never wanted to go more than a day without seeing me. And he grew frustrated any time I made excuses or needed time to myself. I chalked it up to hormones, to young love, but the pressure kept mounting. When I finally tried to talk to him about needing space, he acted understanding at first, but within a week, he was cold at school and explosive over text. He avoided me in the halls and sent me pages of insults at night. He grew jealous of my friends and possessive of my time. Still, I tried to salvage it, thinking maybe I was just bad at relationships. Maybe I didn't know how to handle intimacy. But by the following summer, after 9 months of ups and downs, I broke up with him over text while I was on a trip to Florida. I was 16 and overwhelmed. It felt like the easiest path out. I hoped the distance would help us both move on, but it didn't. Mark unraveled. He spammed my phone for days, calling, begging, insulting, then suddenly acting like nothing had happened. He swung wildly between moods, treating me like his best friend one minute and his greatest betrayal the next. When school resumed that fall, things got worse. Because we had built our schedules together while dating, we now shared 4 out of 7 classes. At first he acted normal. Then he started staring, long, silent, unsettling stares. He began texting me again, this time with sad messages, asking if we could be friends, asking to talk. I relented. I wanted peace. I wanted to believe he had changed. But within days he was trying to latch on again, asking to come with me everywhere, showing up uninvited when I was out with friends. When I turned him down, he became distraught, sending cryptic messages in the early hours of the morning, sometimes hinting at suicide. He told me he'd swallowed a bottle of melatonin one night. I didn't know what to do. I was scared. Scared that if I told anyone, my mum would find out about everything. So I stayed silent, trying to manage the crisis myself. The breaking point came during our school's homecoming float project for drama club. I was chatting casually with 2 of my guy friends, Isaac and Caleb, both straight, both harmless, and Mark saw us. His face went pale. He walked out without a word. A few minutes later, a freshman girl walked in and said he told her I'd know where he was going. I didn't. But later I found out he had driven himself to the emergency room to get counseling. At first I was relieved. Maybe this meant he'd finally get the help he needed. I didn't realize how deeply he had entwined himself into my life. A few days later, I came home from rehearsal to see his car parked on my street. He was walking away from my house. My mother, standing on the porch with my baby brother in her arms, was waving goodbye to him, smiling. She thought we were just old friends. She had no idea. Mark had told her everything, but not the truth. He had spun a story where I was the abuser, the one who had manipulated and betrayed him. My mum confronted me. At first she was angry, confused. But after I told her everything about the relationship, the stalking, the manipulation, she believed me. Still, she was furious I'd hidden it all. I was grounded, and rightly so. But nothing could have prepared us for what came next. That night, while everyone slept, I woke up around 2 a.m. With a chill, I put on my glasses and turned toward the window. It was wide open. My heart began to race. I looked around the room, confused. My door was ajar. I stepped out into the hallway quietly, just in time to hear my mum's door closing softly. Then came a sound that froze me, a soft metallic click, like a gun being cocked. I burst into my mother's room. She was sitting up in bed, her glasses on, a Harry Potter book in her lap, and a pistol in her hands, pointed at the corner of the room. Mark was crouched there, shaking, holding a cleaver. My baby brother was asleep beside her. She told him, in a calm but deadly voice, to be quiet so he wouldn't wake the baby. Then she told me to call the police. I did. Mark was taken into custody. My mum, in her fierce no-nonsense way, refused to press charges on the condition that he be sent to live with his father in Arizona. She just wanted him gone. He left. But the story didn't end there. He continued to message my friends on Snapchat, trying to reach me, trying to claw his way back into my life, through the cracks left behind. For a long time I couldn't sleep properly. I kept checking my window locks 3 times before bed. I stopped going out. I withdrew, not because I missed him, but because I was terrified that someone like him could get that close, get that obsessed, and go that far without anyone noticing. I thought about how easily it could have ended differently. What if my mum hadn't been awake? What if she hadn't been prepared? What if I hadn't woken up in time? These thoughts haunted me. The image of him crouched in the dark corner of our room never really left me. It stays with you, the realization that someone you once cared about could become the monster in your nightmare. In time, the fear dulled. I went back to school. I made new friends. I found people who didn't need to possess me to care about me. I learned to talk about what happened, not hide it. I stopped blaming myself for the way things unfolded. Looking back, I wish I had spoken up sooner, asked for help when the first red flags appeared. I wish I had understood that love, Real love doesn't demand silence, secrecy, or fear. It doesn't creep through windows or hide behind knives. It respects boundaries. It heals. What Mark gave me wasn't love. It was control dressed in affection. It was obsession painted to look like passion, and I survived it. That's something no one can take away. Story 5. The obsession that lasted a decade. I never thought my early fanfiction days would follow me into adulthood, but sometimes the internet opens doors you never meant to walk through. Back in the early 2000s, when I was a teenager, I wrote fanfiction and posted it online. Nothing revolutionary. Just playful stories about cartoon characters and comic book villains. It was harmless fun. And while the quality wasn't great, I connected with a small community of readers and made a few friends. Eventually I grew out of it. I stopped writing stories and shifted to posting fan art and role-play snippets on DeviantArt. Years passed. I moved on with life, started college, made new friends, and thought that chapter was behind me. But then in 2008, I received a strange, lengthy message from someone I didn't know, a person named Ari. That single message would begin a long and deeply unsettling story that still haunts me more than 10 years later. Ari introduced herself by explaining that she was severely mentally ill and had struggled with conditions like schizophrenia for most of her life. She said she had hated me for a long time. Why? Because of a fanfiction I had written years earlier. According to her, my story had terrified her, not because of its content, but because she believed I had stolen something precious from her. She explained that she had been in love with one of the comic book characters I wrote about, a violent villain named John, and that he used to talk to her inside her mind. But when she read my story, she claimed he stopped communicating with her, because now he was speaking to me instead. She believed, truly and completely, that I had stolen him from her and invaded her thoughts. She said she knew this was delusional, but she needed closure. She begged me to respond, to tell her I was just a normal person so she could move on and stop suffering. I should have ignored it. I should have closed the message and blocked her. But I didn't. I'm soft-hearted, sometimes to a fault. The idea that someone was genuinely suffering because of something I wrote when I was 15 struck me deeply. I responded kindly, reassuring her that I was just a regular person, that I didn't have any special connection to the character, and that I hoped she could heal and find peace. I thought that would be the end of it. It wasn't. Ari replied with a cheerful tone, telling me she was so glad we could be friends now. She said she loved my writing and asked for my real name so she could look me up on Facebook. I lied, saying I didn't have an account and was busy with school. I wished her well again and hoped, naively, that she would move on. Months passed. I received another message, this time from a different account. It was phrased like a writing question. How do you get your characters to talk for you? So I assumed it was about dialogue. I drafted a reply, but didn't send it right away. Days later, I got a second message, this one frantic and filled with misspellings, begging me to respond. I eventually sent back a generic answer about writing tips. The response? Another cheerful message from Ari. She admitted it was her again. She said she realized now she didn't just love the comic character. She loved my version of him, the one I had written. She believed that, through our connection, she could speak to him again. Somehow I had become a conduit. It wasn't roleplay to her. It was real. I tried to be gentle, to back away without hurting her feelings. I said my roleplay group was private, and that I wouldn't be very active online for a while, but the messages kept coming. She began creating new accounts, sometimes obvious, sometimes more cryptic, each one trying to reach me. She posted comments like, "You stole him from me," and "You control my reality." She messaged my friends, begging them to convince me to talk to her. She wrote journal entries online accusing other fan creators of stealing John from her. In 2015, 7 years after that first message, I had moved my online presence to Tumblr. I hadn't posted fanfiction in over a decade. I barely talked about the character anymore, but one day I received an anonymous message accusing me of causing immense suffering. It ended with a vague threat. I deleted it, shaken. Then came another, "You stole him from me, and you don't care." Now I knew it was Ari again. Her writing style, the obsession, it was unmistakable. She followed me from platform to platform, always finding ways to get past the blocks. She made dozens of accounts, some of them filled with strange images, sparkly graphics of rats, spiders, and romantic slogans addressed to me. She messaged my girlfriend and my best friend, asking them for friendship while trying to coax information about me. Some messages were poetic, others were threatening. Once she posted a photo of herself glaring into the camera with my username tagged underneath. Another time, she sent me a quote from my favorite author, saying he would disapprove of how I was treating her. The emotional manipulation was relentless. She alternated between begging for love and demanding justice, between adoring me and accusing me of ruining her life. I tried reporting her, but the platforms responded with automated replies, telling me to block her again, as if that solved anything. Every time I saw a notification on my phone, my heart would race. Would it be her again? Had she found another way through? Eventually, I changed my settings so that only mutual followers could message me. But she still managed to find ways, posting comments, tagging me, lurking. That level of familiarity, that deep knowledge of my past, made everything feel more personal. I started worrying about her finding out my real identity. I began deleting old posts, locking down my accounts. I didn't want to share my interests anymore. I didn't want to write or draw or engage with fandoms I once loved. Over time, I watched her behavior spread to others. She found other creators who had written about the same character and sent them similar messages. One user kept a record of her behavior, a screenshot archive of her threats and obsessions. I wasn't special. I wasn't even the only target, but I had been her first. That somehow made it worse. I wasn't responsible for her illness, but I was the spark that lit her delusion, however unintentionally. That guilt sat heavy on me. I hadn't asked for it. I hadn't encouraged it, but I had responded when she reached out, and she had never let go. Now in 2019, I haven't heard from her in a while. Maybe she's lurking. Maybe one day, 10 years from now, she'll return again. I don't know. What I do know is this: the internet is a strange place. It connects you with people you never intended to meet, sometimes in ways that are beautiful and life-changing, and sometimes in ways that are terrifying and scaring. I hope Ari gets help. I hope she finds peace. But I also know that I owe myself peace too. I've learned to protect my time, my space, and my boundaries. I still write. I still create. But I do it cautiously now. Because once you've been stalked across a decade by someone who loves your fiction more than your safety, you learn that being just a fan can sometimes turn into something much darker. Story 6. Bitten by a stranger in Seoul. A few years ago, my university required me to study abroad in Asia as part of my major. I didn't know much about Asia, but one of my friends spoke highly of Korea and encouraged me to go, without much thought. I said yes. I figured I was young, open-minded, and eager for new experiences, so why not? When I arrived in Seoul, I was overwhelmed by the speed of the city, the language barrier, and the cultural differences. I didn't know anyone, and although I was excited, there was a quiet sense of loneliness that settled in after the first week. I had just gone through a breakup and wasn't interested in one-night stands or drunken club hookups. I wanted to experience dating, to understand what it felt like to connect with someone in a new environment, to be seen through a different lens. That's when I downloaded a dating app and met a man named Tim. Tim seemed friendly in our messages, though he didn't share much about himself. He said he was a student too, a bit older, and fluent in English. He seemed eager to meet, and I was still so new to the city that I didn't notice the red flags. How little he revealed about his life. How quickly he pushed for an in-person meeting. We agreed to get tea near the campus. He wanted to pick me up from my dorm, but I insisted on meeting in a public space. I lived in an all-women's dorm, and I didn't want a stranger to know exactly where I lived. He pushed back, saying it would be easier if he came to get me. But I held my ground. That resistance should have been the first warning, but I convinced myself he was just trying to be considerate. On the day of the date, I waited nearly an hour at the meeting spot before he arrived. I messaged him, thinking maybe he was lost, and he replied casually that he just wanted to make me wait. He laughed, so I tried to laugh too, assuming he was being awkward or teasing. When he showed up, he was much smaller and thinner than I expected. dressed strangely in business attire, despite it being a casual evening outing. From the moment we began walking, I noticed something was off. He kept brushing against me, his breathing heavy, and his eyes scanning my face like he was analyzing a painting. The first words out of his mouth were, "You're not as white as I thought you were." I was stunned. I thought I misheard, but when I asked for clarification, he repeated himself. He said my skin was darker than he expected, and that my eyes weren't green. Then he asked, "Are you fully European?" I laughed it off nervously and told him I was Irish and Scandinavian, pale as can be, but he wasn't joking. He mentioned my skin tone and eye color several times during the evening, like he was disappointed. I tried to redirect the conversation, asking about his studies, his background, anything to shift the mood, but he was evasive. He kept saying things like I'm just a mysterious man in a dramatic, movie-like tone. I tried to brush it off again. I wanted the night to go smoothly. I didn't want to cause a scene. When we got to the tea shop, I tried to order something basic. He stopped me and insisted I get a specific tea. He was firm. "You have to have this one," he said, almost like it was part of a script. I was confused but too nervous to argue, so I went along with it. After tea, he asked if we could walk around my school's campus. It was well lit, and the area was familiar, so I agreed. But as we walked, he kept stopping to hug me. Long, awkward embraces that I didn't ask for. He would grab me and hold me tightly, breathing deeply into my hair or neck. It made my skin crawl. I told him politely that I wasn't comfortable, but he didn't stop. Instead, he grew bolder. When I asked him questions to distract him, where he was from, what his goals were, he gave vague answers or deflected entirely. I was beginning to feel trapped. Then he said something that turned the whole night from uncomfortable to terrifying. He told me he wanted to go somewhere darker, more isolated. He said, "I can't let anyone see this," and reached for my arm. Panic surged through me. I pulled away and said I wanted to go back to the main road. He started tugging at me, telling me not to be silly, that it would be romantic, but I didn't listen. I yanked my arm away and started walking quickly, heading toward the street. He followed closely behind. We reached a hospital near the center of town, and I stopped. I told him I needed to go. He begged me to stay, said we could meet again the next day. I told him I would message him later, trying to sound calm. I just wanted him to leave. Then, he leaned in close. I thought he was going to kiss me, and I braced myself, but it wasn't a kiss. Instead, he opened his mouth wide and bit my face hard. The pain was instant and shocking. He bit down on my cheek and nose like a dog clamping down on prey. I screamed, shoved him away, and stumbled back. His face twisted into something unrecognizable. Eyes wide, teeth bared, breathing fast. I ran. I sprinted toward a convenience store nearby, ducked into the back corner, and started to cry. The owner shouted at me in Korean, confused and alarmed. I begged in English, just asking to stay for a minute. I grabbed a popsicle from the freezer and bought it just to have an excuse to be there. I didn't know what else to do. I didn't speak the language. I didn't know how to ask for help. I just stood there shaking, my face burning from where he'd bitten me. When I finally felt safe enough, I looked outside. He was gone. I texted a friend and waited until she came to walk me back to the dorm. On the way, I messaged him and told him to stay away from me. I called him a creep. I told him I was going to the police. Then I blocked him. For days afterward, I was terrified he'd show up at the school. I didn't go anywhere alone. I didn't tell many people because I was embarrassed. I kept asking myself what I'd done wrong, why I hadn't listened to my instincts, why I hadn't left sooner. But it wasn't my fault. It never was. Later, when I called my mum and told her what had happened, she asked me a question that made everything click. She asked if he had said anything strange about my eye color, the tea, the dark, private setting. Then she told me something chilling. The details of our date mirrored scenes from 50 Shades of Grey. The way he spoke, the clothing he wore, the tea he insisted I drink, even the biting. It all lined up with that twisted fantasy. My mom had seen the movie and recognized the pattern immediately. He wasn't just a creep. He was acting out something he had read or watched, and he chose me to play the part. Apparently some men in Korea call it riding the white horse, a disturbing practice where they target foreign women to live out dominance fantasies. Despite all of that, I didn't let it ruin my experience. I stayed. I kept studying. I met someone else. Someone kind, respectful, and warm. We fell in love. We did long distance for a while, and eventually I moved back to Korea to be with him. We're talking about marriage now, so no, that horrible night didn't define me. But I'll never forget it, and I'll never again doubt the value of boundaries, instinct, or a well-lit road. Sometimes survival is about choosing to listen to the fear instead of brushing it aside for the sake of politeness. That night, I listened just in time. Story 7. A window between youth. In 2004, I was 20 years old, living alone in a small, 2-level apartment nestled in a quiet Canadian neighborhood. The place wasn't big, but it was mine. It sat on the main floor of a larger building, with a narrow deck that ran the full length of the front window wall. The apartment had 3 steps up to the main entry, then another short set before you reached the door. The front of the unit was mostly glass, floor-to-ceiling windows with crank-open panels at the bottom that let in the cool breeze. It was fall, and daylight savings had already pulled the sun away early. Evenings arrived fast and heavy with darkness, but that particular night, the temperature was unusually warm. I had the windows open, no blinds drawn, music playing softly, and I was on the phone with my sister, just chatting in my small kitchen living room space. My back was to the windows as we spoke. Something made me turn. At first it was just a flicker in my peripheral vision, something that didn't match the calm of the evening. I paused mid-sentence and glanced behind me. At first I saw nothing, just the reflection of my lit apartment glowing in the glass. But then I turned off the main light, hoping to see more clearly, and that's when I saw him, a man, standing right outside, pressed against the window, his face mere inches from the glass, staring in at me. My heart flipped. I screamed, told my sister what I was seeing, and moved quickly to turn off the remaining interior lights. Panic began creeping up my spine, not loud and dramatic, but slow and cold, like ice settling into my bones. I crouched behind the furniture, trying to stay hidden. The apartment's layout was simple. The kitchen and living room were one space. The hallway door led out toward the building's shared laundry and parking areas, and the staircase next to me led up to the bedroom. I considered running into the hallway, banging on neighbors' doors, but I couldn't bring myself to move. The windows were still open, just wide enough for someone determined to turn to climb through. I could hear him breathing. I knew he could hear me whispering to my sister. I whispered details to her in case he tried to come in. I told her where I was, what I saw, what he was doing. She stayed on the phone with me, urging me to call the police. So I did. I dialed 911, whispering to the operator, hoping help would arrive quickly. But the call took a strange turn. I gave my address and described everything. And then the operator said something I'll never forget. "We can't find your location." I repeated the directions, said I was right behind a prominent recreation center on a main street, in the only apartment building in the area. Still, they seemed confused. And while they tried to figure it out, he came back. The man who had left when I first screamed had returned. This time he banged a window sharp, rhythmic thuds that sent jolts through my spine. I ducked even lower, heart hammering. I whispered desperately into the phone. I could hear the sirens somewhere far off, but they weren't getting closer. The operator kept asking clarifying questions, still unable to place me. I was stunned. My building wasn't hard to find, and yet here I was, alone, hunted, and somehow invisible. Minutes crawled by. He started whispering things through the glass. I couldn't make out all of it, but it was enough to chill me. Sweet things, threatening things, odd disjointed mutterings that made no sense. I stayed silent. At one point I thought he might break the glass. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, I saw flashing lights. A squad car pulled up to the curb. Relief surged through me, only to fade just as fast. The car didn't stop. It slowed, then kept driving. I told the dispatcher they were passing by. She instructed me to go outside and try to flag them down. I hesitated. I didn't want to move, didn't want him to see me. but I also knew this might be my only chance. So against every instinct, I crept toward the door, eased it open, and stepped out into the night. I waved frantically at the car. They rolled down the window, looking confused. "Ma'am, do you need help?" the officer asked. "Yes," I replied, nearly shouting. "I think I just called you." It turned out they weren't even sent to my address. They were just passing by. I gave them the full story. And finally, they parked and began checking the area. But by then, the man was gone. They never found him. No footprints, no trace, just the eerie memory of his face against my glass. I gave my statement. They promised to patrol more often in the area, but nothing ever came of it. I didn't sleep well for weeks afterward. A few days later, I noticed something else, something that made my skin crawl in a different way. The screens on my downstairs windows had been sliced. Cleanly, deliberately. I hadn't noticed before because I hadn't opened the window since that night, but now I could see it. Thin, precise cuts, just enough to make entry easier without noise. I knew my cats hadn't done it. I told the property manager, but she laughed it off at first. "Cats," she said. "They're always scratching something." I showed her the police report. That changed her tune. Suddenly it wasn't funny anymore. Suddenly the building needed better lighting. Suddenly my concern was real. But the damage was done. I didn't feel safe in that apartment after that. I kept the blinds closed, windows locked, furniture pushed in front of anything remotely vulnerable. Eventually I moved. It wasn't just fear that pushed me out. It was a loss of trust. Trust in my surroundings, in the security of glass and wood, in the people responsible for keeping residents safe. I tried to tell myself it had been a one-time thing. Maybe he was just a disturbed man, and I happened to be the window he picked. But deep down I knew better. He had watched me. He knew I was alone. He had waited, and then he came back. I still think about that night. Not constantly, but it lingers like fog at the edges of memory. That face pressed against the glass, the confusion in the officer's voice, the way the breeze blew into my open apartment, and how the warmth of the night masked something far colder lurking just outside. To this day, I don't leave windows open at night. I never sleep without locking every possible entry point, even in the safest places. I no longer assume that because something hasn't happened, it won't. I live in a different apartment now, in a different city, with better lighting and better locks. But sometimes, I catch a shadow in the glass, and I freeze. Just for a second. Just long enough to remember, it's not about living in fear. No one wants that. It's about knowing that sometimes, fear is your only warning, and sometimes your life can change not with a crash or a scream, but with a soft whisper of breath against your window pane. Story 8. The stranger in the vending room. When I was in college, I worked as a resident assistant in one of the older dorm buildings on campus. It was a quiet place most of the time, tucked near the edge of campus where foot traffic thinned, and shadows gathered early in the evening. The building had 5 floors and was a little run down. Flickering hallway lights, low ceilings, and ancient radiators that hissed at night. My room was on the 3rd floor, a small but private space with a window overlooking the back lot. I loved it. It gave me a sense of freedom and peace that I hadn't had living in the main dorms. My RA duties were light, mostly helping freshmen adjust and making rounds once a night to check for anything suspicious or out of place. I didn't mind. In fact, I enjoyed it. Until the night when something happened that would forever change the way I felt about being alone in buildings like that. It was a Tuesday night, late in the semester. Most students were either asleep or holed up studying for finals. I was up late, writing a paper, when I realized I needed a break. I decided to walk down to the vending machines on the 1st floor to grab a soda. It was after midnight, and the halls were silent. I didn't bother changing. I just threw on a hoodie over my pajamas and grabbed my keycard. As I descended the stairs, I noticed that the emergency light above the basement door was out. That wasn't uncommon in that building. Things broke all the time and often went unrepaired for weeks. I made a mental note to report it on my next shift and kept moving. The vending machines were tucked into a tiny room, just off the laundry area, behind a heavy metal door that never quite closed all the way. I stepped into the vending room, the old fluorescent light buzzing faintly overhead. It smelled like dust and hot metal, like every vending room in every building ever. I dropped my coins into the machine and pressed the button for a soda. As the can clunk into the retrieval bin, I bent down to grab it, and that's when I heard it. Footsteps. Slow, deliberate, dragging footsteps just outside the door. My blood ran cold. At first I thought it was just another student, but something felt wrong. The steps didn't move past the door. They stopped right outside. I froze, holding my breath. The metal door was slightly ajar, and I could see just a sliver of the hallway through the crack. I waited, hoping they'd keep walking, but they didn't. Instead, I saw a shadow move slowly across the opening, not walking, pacing. I backed up quietly, trying not to make a sound. The room had no lock, no other exit. If someone came in, I'd be trapped. I pressed myself against the vending machine, heart thudding in my chest, and waited. The footsteps stopped. I heard nothing for a moment, and then, softly, the door began to creak open. I couldn't move. I couldn't even think. A figure stepped inside, tall male, wearing a dark hoodie with the hood pulled up, obscuring his face. He didn't say anything. He didn't even look at me at first. He just stood there, breathing heavily, as if trying to decide what to do. Then he looked at me, and in that moment I knew he wasn't a student. His eyes were wrong, too old, too empty. I knew every face in that building. He didn't belong. I tried to speak, to ask who he was, but my voice failed me. He smiled, just a little. Then he stepped closer. I reached behind me, fumbling for the soda can, anything I could use as a weapon, but my hand trembled, and the can slipped from my grasp, clattering loudly to the floor. The noise startled him. He took another step toward me, his hand twitching at his side. Then, from somewhere down the hallway, a door slammed. The sound echoed through the corridor like a gunshot. He turned toward it, startled. I didn't wait. I bolted, shoving past him with everything I had. I ran out of the vending room, down the hallway, up the stairs, and straight into my room. I locked the door and collapsed on the floor, gasping for breath. I didn't sleep that night. I sat with my back against the door, waiting for something, anything. The next morning, I filed a report with campus security. They searched the building, checked the cameras, what few there were, but found nothing. No one saw the man enter or leave. There were no clear images, no way to verify who he was. They told me he was probably a transient, maybe someone looking for a place to sleep. But the way he looked at me, the way he smiled, I knew better. That wasn't someone looking for a place to rest. That was someone waiting, watching. Someone who had been in that building before. Someone who knew where to find people who were alone. I started carrying pepper spray after that. I changed my routes, never visited the vending room at night again. I even kept a chair wedged under my doorknob, just in case. A week later, another RA from a nearby dorm told me a similar story. She'd seen a man matching the same description hanging around her building late at night, pretending to be a student. When she approached him, he vanished down a stairwell. No one ever caught him. No one ever identified him. Eventually, the stories faded, and students moved on. But not me. I still think about that night often, the way the silence was broken only by his breath and the soft creak of that metal door. I still see his face in my mind, the way his eyes scanned me like I was already his. I don't scare easily, but that encounter made me feel something I hadn't felt before, true helplessness. Years have passed since then. I've moved, graduated, changed jobs, changed cities, but even now, when I walk through dimly lit hallways, or hear a sudden noise in an empty building, I feel that old fear return. I lock every door behind me. I check windows twice. I listen for footsteps when everything else is still, because I learned that danger doesn't always announce itself with force. Sometimes it waits in vending rooms. Sometimes it wears a hoodie and walks softly. And sometimes it doesn't want anything from you, except the moment you forget to be afraid.